Okay. So yeah. Well, I guess one of my last writing sessions here in Calgary before I take off in a few days, spend 3 or 4 days in Vancouver, and then off to Iceland for 2.5 months. And while I'm there, I have a specific focus for my internship that I'm doing while I'm there, but as a personal project and sort of tying everything together with what I'm doing there for work as well is writing and publishing a book. So, Iceland, I don't know how true this is. I should maybe research it. Maybe it's just a joke. They have a lot of per capita statistics and then a lot of per capita statistic jokes. It's sort of a funny thing, right? They have a small population, and so a lot of per capita stats are skewed either in favor or not in favor for the Icelandic population. And so it's always sort of a funny joke to say Iceland has the most such and such per capita, the most this per capita, the most that per capita. You know, when we met with the president of Iceland last summer when I was there, even he himself was making these sorts of jokes and comical references to their per capita stats. But one that I have heard often, and even like way back when I was younger, I remember different family members saying this, that Iceland has the most authors per capita, maybe the most published authors per capita. And certainly beyond that, they have a very literary culture, and they have since literally the beginning of Icelandic culture, the beginning of time of Iceland being a community and being a nation. And fun fact, if you're not familiar with the Icelandic literary culture, you actually are for many reasons. One is, and this was mainly Snorri Sturluson writing these old Icelandic sagas you've maybe heard of, the Icelandic sagas. And he documented and wrote down those ancient Norse myths and just the whole structure of Norse mythology with gods like Thor and Odin and all of those, that whole framework of Norse mythology that we're all familiar with today from like Marvel movies and pop culture. But without the Icelandic writers of those sagas, those stories, those oral histories could have been lost in time. The Icelanders were really the first people to put those stories into writing. And then that carried them into the modern world where now it's like made into movies and films, and we are continuously expanding upon those Nordic mythologies. And then Tolkien, and this is something that the president of Iceland talked to us about, J.R.R. Tolkien, and his work with The Lord of the Rings, which to me was maybe the most influential thing in the world when I was young. Like 3 to 4 years old, I started watching Lord of the Rings, and I got to, the three came out during those years when I was still young, like I guess maybe 3 to 5 years old is when the Lord of the Rings were released. And so I would just watch those films and literally over and over and over again, rewind and just continuously watch them. It was very impactful on me. But it can be thought that really Tolkien would have never created the Lord of the Rings world without first being inspired and having a lot to take from the ancient Icelandic writings and all of the mythologies and stories and ideas that were put forth by the very literate and prolific, more ancient Icelandic writers. So there's a lot to be said about Icelandic culture and the influence that it's had on society. Now, me, myself, with my goal to write my Icelandic book and publish it in Iceland, that's one of the reasons why I'm pursuing this path, publishing it there. One, I feel like the connections to publishing houses, editors, and just a writing community is a bit easier to find that in Iceland. Because of its small size, you're hanging out in Reykjavik, their capital, and it's just sort of easier to find those communities and involve yourself with them. Things are a bit more connected and closer, more closely intertwined. Whereas here in Canada, and if I expand out in the United States, it's like just a massive landmass of different cultures, different ideologies, different communities, that it is much more difficult to go and insert yourself into the communities that you yourself want to be a part of. Iceland sort of lends itself to finding your community that you want to be involved with a bit more, just due to its size, and there's a general openness in the culture there and in the society. And also going through the experiences that I've had with Iceland and with my relatives that live there and all the friends and family connections that I've continued to foster there, I feel like I'm more connected. I know who to reach out to see like, hey, I'm trying to publish this book. Do you have any friends, or do you know who I can go to within the publishing community here in Iceland? It's a bit easier to network and figure out who to talk to, who to work with, who to get involved with my book project. So things are really shaping up to lend themselves nicely to this project. And I'm very hopeful. You know, never before in my life have I been this close to actually publishing something. You know, I've always been writing and I've always had creative ideas, and going back to my ambitions and ideas when I was watching Lord of the Rings, when I was just a child, like my first conscious thoughts as a human being were that I want to create. And at that time it was verbally articulated as, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to make movies. I want to do stuff like Peter Jackson. I would watch the behind the scenes of Lord of the Rings ad nauseum, just all the time. And just watching that whole creative process, getting everybody together. And now as I look back on it, like Lord of the Rings is a fucking miracle. Any film like that is a miracle. Now that I understand a bit more of human dynamics and what it takes to actually orchestrate humans together to create this massive project like a huge film like the Lord of the Rings, it's like, wow, that's a miracle. To get that done, all the different people that you need to coordinate, all the different pieces that you need to tie together, the writing that goes behind it, the vision, and then getting it all together to create this coherent, massive film. And really, the three Lord of the Rings, they can be watched as just this like 10-hour long film. It's a masterpiece and it's incredible. And I was enamored by that process from a small child. And so I always knew I wanted to somehow be involved in this sort of creative process. And today, and the way my life has unfurled and the pathways that I've taken, it seems like this first real project that I will do that thing like directing a film or like writing a symphony or writing a book is you're one individual and you have an idea and you have a vision. And there's all these moving parts to that vision, because that's what life is, a bunch of moving parts all over the place. And our brains this is how we operate in the world. It's like there's all these things to focus on at all times. Like right now I'm sitting in my house and there's like infinity around me. There's all these books which have words that I could start reading. There's all these symbols around me. I'm looking at my kitchen over there. And then there's all these tools. There's knives, there's spatulas, there's chairs, there's tables, there's lights. And then there's the whole outside world, which is like an infinity of different things to attend to. And so there's all these things going on around us all the time, and our brains take it all down and compact it into just one thing to focus on at a time. And we're really good at that. And so people who write a symphony or make a movie or write a book, it is taking from all these different pieces, juggling all these different ideas around. In music, it's taking all these different notes and putting them together in something that is coherent, in something that when you listen to it, it all goes together and it makes sense. And then along the way, there's surprises. You take the listener to places that they didn't really expect to go, but as they're going there, they think, oh yeah, this makes sense. You know, this makes sense to go here. And then how are we going to get back on track? How are we going to get to the main theme? How is this piece all going to come together? You wonder that along the way. And then the great composer brings it all together and ties it all together right at the end. And everyone is just like, wow. When you experience that, you're happy. It's like taking you through life, right? The patterns of music is like going from birth to death and the whole process in between. And whenever we can experience that, it makes us all feel good. And then we stand up and give the orchestra a standing ovation. And I've gone to the symphony the most that I ever have in my entire life over this last season of the Calgary Philharmonic Symphony. And it's been really insightful to gain that insight into music on a much deeper level. And I've been doing this at the same time as I've been writing over the past year. And so I've been drawing these analogies of the writing process to the process of writing symphonies. And I've realized, like, you know what? As a human being, as someone who has a brain and a body, we're all capable. We can all write the symphony. We can all write the book. We can all make the film. All of us can do it. All it takes is just doing it. And just doing it is that exact process of taking all these ideas, taking all these things, whether it's musical notes or words in a book or visuals for a movie, all these ideas, all these things together, and then slowly grabbing them and then piecing them together and balling them up into one thing. And when you have that one thing, that is the book, that is the symphony, the song, the movie, whatever it is, you're piecing them all together and putting them in, and then you have this one coherent thing. And then as someone who's either reading that book or listening to that music or watching that film, you go through the whole process and you think, oh yeah, how nice is this? You know, this is very nice. I'm glad that somebody put this all together for me, and now I can experience this coherent structure. And that it takes all these different things that are seemingly unconnected and it connects them in such a way that just feels right. For some reason, our brains like that sort of structure, and all it takes to be a successful musician, composer, writer, filmmaker, speaker, storyteller, whatever it is, artist, if you're painting or something, all it takes to do that is to just do that and then compile it all together into something that other people can understand. And that process, I keep saying just do it, and that process is relatively simple and straightforward enough, but it is actually really fucking hard. And as you're writing something down, as you're writing a symphony, you have to work so hard to keep the overarching patterns in your mind. And it is really intense, and it's so easy to lose track of that. So I know that so many people have started writing something, and along the way they get sidetracked from life and all these other things that distract them. And you just say, oh, well, you know, I'll leave it aside. I'll maybe complete it next year, or I'll do it some other time, or maybe I'll just scrap the whole project altogether. And that decision, that project is going to fall by the wayside, and you're never going to complete it. And I think there's merit to starting something and not completing it. It's better than not having tried to start something at all. But there's also something so magical about being able to create and complete something, and to present that symphony to people, to present that book. And I think in many ways, it doesn't matter so much the content of it. As long as you've actually completed it, people admire it, and people will enjoy just the fact that it is complete. The fact that you did this whole thing, went from point A to point B, and you tied it all together and put it out there. Now, whether it's a good symphony or a good book or not, kind of doesn't even matter. Just the process of completing it is something that we admire, and we'll clap and applaud and say, oh, good for you. Isn't it nice that you wrote this whole book and completed it? Because most people don't. So that's one thing. In addition to that, of course, if you're going to go through that process, you want to kind of make something that's really fucking good. And so I'm trying my absolute best to make something that is really fucking good. And as I go through the writing process, I continually surprise myself, and I think, wow, this is actually really good. And I surprise myself in the directions that I go, the different ways that I'm writing, the different pathways that branch off from this structure that I think I'm writing about, but then you go off in all these directions. And just like a symphony, when the music starts going off in this different area, you got to think, how does this come back? How does this reconnect with the main theme for a final conclusion? You know, and that's something that well, my book is not finished. It's not written to completion yet. And so it is a little bit nerve-wracking. How does this all come together again? But in some way, just like someone listening to a symphony, you kind of know that it's going to all piece together again and be completed. And when it does, it's very relieving. It'll certainly be relieving to me as the writer, because the process can be very stressful a lot of the times. And I feel that urge that tells me, do a different project. Just scrap this. You can complete this next year. You're not going to finish it, or work on something else. And that distraction is pulling you away from completing it. And that's the danger. And I think that's the thing that most people give into. And that's why there's endless unfinished projects in the world and only so many completed books. I do look around at my library, and sometimes I go to the library downtown, and I'm just overwhelmed with the sheer quantity of books that exist. But then I take that perspective elsewhere, and I go down to the busy streets or at the zoo where I work, and there's 10,000 people that come through there in a day, and I look at all the humans, and I realize, wow, it's such a small percentage of humans that actually write and complete and publish books. Even though there's a lot of books out there, there's a lot of ideas floating around, a lot of things that have already been written about, there's still endless amounts of things to write about, endless amounts of stories to document, to put out there in the world. And so whenever I have these ideas, there's already enough books out there, there's so many authors, there's so many this, there's so many that. Who am I to do one myself? I just try to dispense with that and realize that the world needs you to complete your ideas. The world needs you to complete your symphonies. The world needs you to put your music out there into the world, to share your ideas, to share your stories, to talk, to present your ideas like what I'm doing right now. The world needs this. Whether or not other people acknowledge that, or whether or not this gets to the right audience and connects with the right people, that's all sort of trivial, and that will work itself out. All we can do is affect our output. All we can do is do the work and share our thoughts, share our ideas, share our music, create our art. That's all we can do. And the rest will just take care of itself somehow. But certainly nothing good will happen if you don't do the work to begin with. And so, well, maybe that's a good place to end this. I started this video by thinking that I should maybe talk about how my writing style is unfolding. And it has been interesting how it has been unfolding. And certainly I'm inspired by different authors that I've read throughout my life, and I can kind of trace my style of writing to different authors. And also my writing style changes throughout the book. And I am a little bit nervous of sitting down with an editor and going through a publishing house, because I think something that's great about my writing is that it is incoherent in many ways and at many times. And there's different ideas that go in different directions that it's like, how is this relevant to the narrative? But that's exactly like a really creative and inspiring symphony, where you think, where the hell am I going right now? How is this going to connect back? And it just does, and it just works. And to me, that is the epitome of creativity. And, well, if you know me in person, I like to think that people know me as someone who's a very lateral thinker and often connecting the dots to random, seemingly unconnected things. And I really find a lot of joy in life when I'm able to piece together obscurities and put them together in some very strange way. And I think there's a lot of beauty in life when you're able to connect the dots with really unconnected things. And it just makes you come back and realize that everything is interconnected. And when you can piece that all together in one project, into one ball, I'm excited to present that to the world. And I'm excited for all of you to come along and be invited into this with me, and to branch out and to expand in new projects as well as time goes on. So that's the whole process, and that's my thoughts on the whole thing. And if you're listening to this, watching this, whatever, I invite you along to join the ride, I guess. And one way or another, I'm having fun and I'm enjoying myself. The whole process can be painful at times, but it's really, really beautiful. And it's something that I hope that every single person can find their path in life, find their project to put themselves into, connect the dots, and make it work. So, well, there we go.